Hi, and welcome to the Internet Report, where we cover what's breaking and what's working on the internet and why. My name is Archana Kesavan, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host Angelique Medina.
Hi, everyone.
And in today's episode, keeping up with the election theme, we are going to talk about two outages that we saw last week. One was an outage to the Minnesota online voter help tool that took a hit a little bit right before election day, over the weekend before the election day. And then the other outage we would get into is CNN's interactive electoral college map, which on the day of the election seemed to have some issues there, and we're going to cover both of those in Under the Hood section today.
So the first one we're going to talk about is the Minnesota Secretary of State website, which had an issue on the Saturday before the election. We didn't do an episode last week, so we're just covering that here. But as you can see, that actually did make headlines, local headlines, because this was a place where folks could track their ballot and understand whether it had been received, if there were any issues. And they had indicated this was some kind of hardware issues.
They've also indicated
this was
that
hardware related.
Right. So the website actually had an outage on Saturday, and they were also talking about some kind of planned maintenance. So just not to confuse both of that, like this was actually an outage, which, interestingly, we saw really different, manifestation of the outage depending on where the user is, right?
Yeah. That was particularly interesting. So in Minnesota, for example, there was there seemed to have been a redirect loop. So, if you were connecting from, for example, Minneapolis, we saw that you would basically be, you'd continually get 302 error codes. And the redirect URL that was handed back off to the client was basically the same URL again and again and again. So it was in like this, it just kept going to the site and getting that redirect. But if you were in other locations,
if you moved over to Ashburn, for instance, very clearly the site timed out, right? It just did not load. And then that, in contrast to LA, now it's kind of ironic because if you were in LA and this is a Minnesota Secretary of State website that tells you where your polling location is and things like that, you're probably not going to access it from LA. But in terms of, the user experience, LA had really long wait times. And few of the objects on the page seem to be different than, in a previous timestamp. So when you went into a point in time where the outage was not happening, we noticed that there were a lot more objects that were loading on the page, but that increased, page load times here very clearly. The number of objects that are loading on the page is different, and also how long it takes to load for the page to load is different as well, as you see here.
So root object was taking a long time to load, and specifically it was the wait time. So this was really on kind of like the application side. DNS seemed fine, SSL was connecting to the server, et cetera. So it was really kind of on the application side, it was taking a long time. And then there's these other kind of providers like Edgecast and so on, Facebook, others. Some of those components were loading, but again, I think a lot of the core components that were served by the state of Minnesota were just not actually being served.
Right. That's
and
right.
this is LA, that, the behavior is a little bit different, but people are really mobile today. There's a lot of folks that are kind of, might be absent, whether you're voting absentee or you're just kind of, maybe working remotely from a different location than usual.
Yeah, that's possible for sure. Yeah, but it didn't last too long. This was pretty short-lived, which was definitely a positive. Now, if you're, and this can happen to any website, right? So if you're in the back end, building the website, for instance, as a developer, then just understanding how different, regions or users might be experiencing this issue was, definitely something to keep in mind. and it's not always like, it seems like it was a hardware issue as declared by the state itself, but it was manifesting in like completely different ways, like we saw here right now.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're like, if you're running the site, or you're the app developer, the web developer, like these different behaviors may help you kind of triangulate what the problem is, and kind of narrow it down. So doesn't, we don't necessarily know definitively why we would see these different behaviors, but as an application developer, you would. And so this is helpful for shedding light on that.
Definitely.
The other thing that was really interesting, because I think like most people in the US and probably even outside of the US, like we were all kind of glued to the news on the election day. So Tuesday, particularly in the evening hours, which is, historically when you start to see election results. Obviously that didn't happen, but yeah, exactly. So there's, a lot of different interactive maps available out there from different media sources. So for example, there's like the CNN election map, there's like MSNBC, a whole bunch of others. Nate Silver's site has one as well. So when I was trying to reach the CNN, this is Tuesday evening, trying to reach the CNN interactive electoral map, the page was taking forever to load. So like we're talking like 60 seconds, crazy times. And then when it finally did, I was getting like a timeout error code, seemingly related to like a caching timeout. And then my colleague, who was in a different state, was also getting a similar kind of behavior.
You guys were on like different browsers as well, right?
Right.
So this was
he was
kind of
using
like
Firefox. I was on Chrome.
yeah.
We were different networks, different states. So this was like not something related to like any kind of, user specific issues or maybe local issues, or even like the endpoint, like the front end server that we might have been hitting.
Definitely not your Wi-Fi, Angelique.
It was definitely not my Wi-Fi. We ruled that out. And especially since I was watching the news via Wi-Fi. So I know that wasn't the issue. But what I did see, where we saw that evening, was when we were just taking a look at like what's going on. And we could see that like, regardless of where the user was located, so we're testing from a variety of locations around the US, almost every one of them was just like off the charts in terms of the length of time it was taking to load the page. So we're talking about, like you can see here, kind of like this threshold of 60 seconds I had, and almost every one of them were kind of pushing that. So it was
the majority of the time there, as you see in the pie chart, where it's like spent in just like waiting for the server to actually respond.
Absolutely. Good point. So DNS was fine, resolved the domain quickly, connecting to the server. So network was fine, SSL. It was really the length of time that it was taking that server to actually return a response. It was pretty crazy. Now, what you can see also is interesting is that there was this really significant spike on election night, and then it kind of started to go down, it's kind of in the morning, early morning. And, so we're showing green. It's kind of, not amazing, but like 90, under 200 milliseconds, that's perfectly fine. But what was kind of interesting about this is that even though, the server was a little bit more responsive, the actual loading of the page was not great. So, I mean, this behavior kind of persisted. And again, like, this is important because that it wasn't just the election evening that it needed to be available. There was a lot of people who were really interested. It was more like election week.
I mean, this
multiple days after.
Election week, right?
Yeah, exactly. So just looking here, for example, we see, this looks like it's good, and then you see some spikes, but actually it was pretty terrible. Like, so 20 seconds. It
looks like it's good because the timeline is reflective.
8 seconds to load a page is not good. That's not good.
That's definitely not good.
But if we look here, for example, like particular points where it was really bad, I mean, it was like at that 60-second threshold, which is really remarkable for a page to load and what people would generally expect.
Right. Now, Angelique, you made a point earlier, in terms of there were multiple websites that were actually catering to this type of an interactive map, right? CNN was not the only website like that was doing it. And I think that's really critical here, because if you change the context a little bit and think about it of this to be a retail website, for instance, right? Like, and you're actually losing your viewers or your audience, and they just flip over to, somebody else. So it's really like in this age of digital transformation of SaaS, like user experience is like that currency that you're, working with. And anything that's, beyond optimal, in this case, like 8 seconds, like that's not even like acceptable.
That was when it was doing well, right?
Yes,
Like, and then,
exactly. Yeah. So
exactly.
the downside of this is, definitely poor user experience, but then you're also losing, your viewership and your kind of like.
That's a great point. I mean, like if we look at like the CNN site today, and it is loading, like it's loading fine. Again, it's kind of out of context. We already know who's won the election, so not a lot of users are going to be coming to this, but it's almost like it was frozen in time.
Yeah.
It's not been updated. All of kind of like, up until like, Friday or Saturday of last week, it wasn't performing that well at all, probably not getting a lot of users because of that. At least if you were using Chrome, it turned out that it like seemed to have improved a little bit for non-Chrome users, but there's a lot of people who use Chrome as their web browser, and it was still causing an issue for them. And now I'm in Chrome and it seems like it's fine, but you can see here that it hasn't really been updated. It's still kind of like and for those of you on the audio,
it looks like, right?
For those of you on the audio podcast, what we're looking at is basically that the site is still showing that there's like 210 or there's a whole bunch of like electoral college votes that are up for grabs, and it's not reflective of kind of the current state of things. Now, what I ended up doing, which is something you can kind of see here, is going to the MSNBC interactive electoral college map, which was working and didn't have an issue, was loading just fine. And you can see here that this is actually up to date. So it's showing current status. So, the point, as you were saying, was that if something's not working, if you're not able to offer a good experience, there's usually a lot of options for folks to go, whether that's shopping online or getting news information or interacting with different tools. So it's really important that be paid a lot of attention to.
Yep.
And one of the things that we were noticing was the commonality across like the performance issues we were seeing with the CNN Electoral College interactive map seemed a lot of them to be related to like the ad plugins and integrations that they had.
And it was consistent that, what you're showing here right now is just one specific example where I believe this is AdNexus that you're going to. That the object is, being loaded from AdNexus. But we saw multiple instances. We saw Outbrain, we saw Powerlinks, and all of these were some kind of advertisement technology related, platform, plugins, objects that the website was trying to load. And the other, and in this case, it looks like the wait time was really high in terms of loading this particular object. But we also saw some instances where SSL was kind of, taking a long time to load to these ad platforms as well, right?
Yeah, that was just really interesting. We, again, similar to the Minnesota site, we saw different behaviors of the site at different points in time. Now, the outcome was still the same across all of them. So across the board, like for days, like the page was just taking forever to load. And the common, and it looked slightly different for different locations, and even at same location at different points in time. But the commonality was that it always seemed to be the advertising kind of plugins or extensions or sites that the user was being directed to on the front end that seemed to be the source of the issue, which is kind of interesting because you wouldn't think that an ad experience would necessarily be like critical to loading the page. You would think that like if it was the ads, that's like the first thing you want to do is actually load the page, and then like second to that, okay, serve up ads. But for whatever reason, that seemed to have been contributing to either the slowness of the site or just even getting errors. So kind of interesting thing to contemplate in terms of when you're architecting the front end, components, like how they interact with each other, and what actually happens if any one of these components is not working. What does that mean
Right.
from a user standpoint? So it's really important to understand.
I think, like, for me, like, definitely the most interesting aspect of both of these, outages or disruption was like how different users were probably seeing or experiencing different things. Like,
Yeah.
that changes how you even talk about problems, right? For instance, if you're on Twitter, you might be complaining that the page is slow versus page is timing out. As an end user, like, you don't really know what's happening. You're just like talking about the
Yeah.
symptoms, and typically platforms that use that type of sentiment analysis to know something is wrong
Mm,
doesn't really help you identify what the problem is, or if
yeah.
if it's even being rightly reported. So it's a good indicator, but it's not something that can actually get you down to the root cause of what exactly
Yeah, it tends to be very binary, those
exactly
sentiment sites. It's like it's not working for me or it's working just
exactly
fine. And those are kind of not necessarily
from an
helpful
operational
pieces of
point of
information.
view.
Yeah, I mean, you may already know kind of something's gone wrong, but you have to then read the tea leaves, so to speak, and that's what's going to help you kind of narrow things
Totally.
down,
And
because
it's
it could be that, hey, if it's some component that you don't control that's not loading and
yeah,
that's in impacting how your users are experiencing your site, then you can potentially like shut that down,
very
clear your
clearly in the
CDN cache,
CNN
maybe.
example.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, figure out where to go from there. So good lessons in terms of digital experience. And yeah, so that was sort of the lesson from these two incidents.
Yep.
And I think we're all overall very happy that last week is over and done with. um,
Yep.
and
That
yeah,
yeah, that's our show. As always, we're going to keep monitoring the internet for what's breaking. If there is an interesting website that you think we should be looking at, definitely let us know. Don't forget to subscribe. As always, follow us on Twitter. And if you have any questions or feedback, or if you'd like to see a guest featured on this show, definitely send us a note at internetreport
absolutely.
at thousandeyes.com. And again, for all our new subscribers, if you haven't claimed a t-shirt yet, again, send us your address and t-shirt size, and we'll get that right over to you to internetreport at thousandeyes.com. And with that, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.